So are you able to talk about it from the perspective of a developer?
Yeah. So, most developers, again, each team's different. So sometimes you see Kanban, sometimes you see Scrum, sometimes you see Agile. It's just straight up loose processes. So a developer will typically follow one of those processes. So you've got your planning, what tickets are you working on, estimating of those tickets, planning it and prioritizing that. And then you go through and you work on those tickets. In addition to that, Amazon is really a tech-led culture where my job is not to dictate solutions. My job is to make sure that the right perspective is being used, the right measurements are being defined. And we're identifying the right problems. So I'll work with the developers to hone in on what they're solving and how they're solving it, but the developers own those.
Okay.
So as a problem arises, one of the first questions is like, okay, well, how are we going to solve this? And then help guide those developers to ensure that they're solving the right thing with the right vision, the right perspective. A lot of developers are very immediately focused. All right, let's solve this problem now.
Yes.
Yeah. My job is to be, how do we solve this problem now, and how will we solve it for 5 years down the road?
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. It's like what's the solution that will fix it for everyone right now? But then is that the actual getting to the root cause of the issue? And would that solution allow for some element of maintainability later on? What's the overhead of that solution? Because there's many solutions to a single problem, right? And there's many ways of many technologies that you can use, and they all have different negatives and positives. So and it's very similar to when I was working as a CTO at the startup. Is like, as a CTO, my job wasn't really to dictate technology. I dictate where it makes sense. Like, what's the vision and what's the ultimate goals? We want to have super easy deployment processes. We want to have a really good accurate development experience. But like, how that's done really wasn't my job to dictate too much. It was really, okay, so if we do this now, what's the trade-offs? How do we ensure that we're actually solving the problem? Are these the trade-offs we want to make now? Is it, those type of questions? That's, I like that. I like the fact that you're able to separate, or there is you being able to separate those concerns, and you can think of that and then come to talk to your developers about that. Because like you mentioned, sometimes we as developers try and think of everything and try and solve things without thinking that far ahead. You kind of need to have a step back and appreciate the whole complexity. Wow. I work with some freelance clients, and I guess in some cases I'm having to do all of that at once, and that does get quite tricky. Sometimes you end up going down a path, and you spend a good, maybe a day going down that path, and you've discovered that isn't actually the solution that you should be putting through, and therefore you've now wasted a day's worth of development. What you should have done is actually taken a step back and thought about that, and actually sort of appreciated the bigger picture. But sometimes that is extremely difficult, especially if you're on a time-based thing. But I'm not the size of Amazon, so I don't have the joy of having.
Well, I have to say, if you're only losing a day, you're doing it well. You're doing a good job, because I remember being in my freelance or at other companies where it's like, oh yeah, those 2 months that was worthless.
Well, the biggest tragedy that us developers face is writing a load of code that never gets seen. Never gets seen the light of day, because either the decision of the business has gone in a different direction, or you're solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved.
and it's, you either have misstepped the mark in terms of reading the spec or something. And yeah, it's sort of like, you've written all of this code. You, as a developer, you're kind of like growing it like you would, help mature a baby, and you're feeding it and all of this, like, and you're making it scalable and all of this jazz, and then it doesn't happen. It's like, oh, good.